All right, let's talk about dating apps. In this explainer, we are going to pull back the curtain on the whole swiping game to figure out what really leads to success.
I mean, we all wonder about it, right? You've got the perfect photo, a killer bio, but is there something else? A hidden formula that predicts whether you actually get a date or maybe even more?
Well, it turns out a new study says, yes, there is a secret. And get this, the answer isn't in some new algorithm, it's rooted in some seriously ancient evolutionary strategies. The rules of the game are apparently way, way older than the app itself. So yeah, let's dive into this.
Okay, so to really get what this study is saying, we've got to wrap our heads around this one really powerful idea they have. This concept of an evolutionary arena, but for the digital age.
So picture this. In the wild, you've got this thing called a lek. It's basically a showroom, a competitive stage where individuals, usually males, show off their best stuff to attract a partner. You know, think of those birds of paradise doing their crazy dances. It's all about display, competition, and mating.
And here is where it gets really interesting. The researchers are saying that dating apps have become our digital lek. It's a human version, but with a huge twist. See, unlike in the animal kingdom, both men and women are searching. And the biggest difference? You can't see your competition. That one change, it makes the whole dynamic completely different.
Right, so if these apps are the new playground, who are the ones playing the game? And what are their strategies? This is where the study brings in a really powerful framework for understanding all this, called life history theory. So this theory basically says we're all on a kind of spectrum. On one end, you have slow life strategists. These are folks who tend to invest a lot in long-term relationships, family, that kind of thing. But on the other end, you've got the fast life strategists who are geared more towards short-term mating. And that approach comes with some very specific traits. And this fast strategy, it shows up in 3 key ways that the researchers could actually measure. First, an interpersonal style that leans into what's called the Dark Triad. Second, a high level of sociosexuality, which is just a fancy way of saying a bigger interest in casual sex. And third, a search style that's, well, less picky, a willingness to satisfy, or settle, rather than holding out for the absolute perfect person.
Okay, so let's get to the juicy part. First up, just getting a date. The real question is, do these so-called fast traits actually, work? To figure this out, the team looked at data from just under 500 dating app users. They simply compared the people who had actually gone on a date from an app with those who hadn't. And the results? Whoa, they were super clear. The people with those faster life strategies, the ones with higher scores in things like narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, plus a stronger desire for casual sex, they were way more likely to have actually gone on a date. It seems their particular style is really effective, at least for getting a foot in the door. But hold on, because this is where the story takes a really interesting turn. Getting a date is one thing, but what about predicting if that date leads to sex? That, my friends, is a whole different ballgame. Yeah, it turns out the playbook completely changes at this stage. The traits that get you the date aren't necessarily the ones that seal the deal, and what works for men is totally different from what works for women. And this is just wild. For men, the biggest predictors of having sex were higher psychopathy scores and a stronger sex drive. But for women, it was something else entirely. For them, the key was their search style. Women who were less picky, who were willing to satisfy, reported more sexual encounters. And you can really see how this plays out in the overall numbers. Of all the people in the study who reported having sex from a dating app encounter, a whopping 2/3 of them were men. Only 1/3 were women. So what's the big takeaway here? What does all this mean for us? It's pretty powerful, really. It suggests that our super modern technology is just a new stage for some very, very old and deeply human behaviors. And the researchers point to something that could have huge implications. They're basically saying that because this digital lek makes short-term mating so easy and presents what feels like an endless supply of options, it might actually be changing the game for long-term commitment. When you boil it all down, what this study is really showing us is that the people who lean into that ancient, fast reproductive strategy, well, they're the ones who are having the most mating success in this very, very modern world. And that leaves us with a pretty mind-bending question, doesn't it? If our oldest evolutionary scripts are being amplified by our newest technology, what on earth does that mean for the future of love? It's definitely something to think about.